Hey friends, it is Chris Loewen here again with another episode from our Outside the Wall podcast. This is a podcast where we have a lot of conversations with people of different perspectives from what many of us will normally encounter in everyday life. The ideas and the topics that we discuss in each of these episodes are there for us to consider, but there is no expectation or pressure for everyone to agree, nor are these even positions that are held officially by Crossview Church. The desire is to listen and learn through healthy dialogue from a posture of curiosity without feeling the pressure to agree with everything that is said. Alright, so in today's episode, we have a very special guest on the show named Pauline Loewen, who just happens to be my mom. Not only has she been a dear mother to me, but she has also been a close friend, someone who has been in my corner all my life. You will get to know more about Pauline soon enough. But in this conversation, Chris and we talked to her about what it was like for her to raise two children with profound hearing loss. In hearing Pauline's story, you are going to hear bits and pieces of my own story. So without further ado, please welcome to the show, Pauline Loewen.
Hello, everybody, and welcome here again to Outside the Walls podcast. We're here today with Chris Loewen's mom, Pauline, to hear some incredible stories of families overcoming. Pauline, why don't you just start? Let's just dive right into this. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what you've been up to these days.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Pauline Loewen, and I'm married to Cliff Loewen, and we live in Blumenort. We have 3 children and 3 children-in-law. And we have 10 grandkids. They keep us hopping. I'm a homemaker and I love to connect with my neighbors, and I volunteer in our church. And I also love to spend one-on-one time with my grandkids. Since 2 of our 3 kids live far away, we spend a lot of time traveling. So that is one of the things that keeps us occupied. We love to travel to Texas and to Southern Ontario, and we get to see all our grandkids. So that's what's keeping me busy these days. And now yard work and that kind of fun stuff.
Blessed yard work.
I know.
Spring.
The sun is finally out. The sun is finally out. Hi, Mom. It's good to see you.
Hi.
Okay, so Mom and Chris, what we want to talk about today is, what it has been like for you to raise 2 disabled children, of which I am one of them. And so this conversation is one that I've been excited about. And so, Mom, if you can just start out with, you grew up in a very musical family, and this influenced what you expected for your own family in your own future. Can you tell us a bit about that and that story?
Sure. So my mom and dad, both of them were very musical people. My mom used to sing in the festival in Steinbach, and she won all kinds of trophies. My dad led choirs at Steinbach Bible College, and well, maybe not at Steinbach Bible College, but in his mission endeavors, in their churches, they did that kind of thing. And we also sang together as a family, and we sang together with me and my siblings. We sang together as well. And so I hoped for that in the future as well. So my husband and I, Cliff, we have sung together a lot. He plays the guitar and we sing together. We also did music in the church together and separately. So yes, I was anticipating making music together with my whole family at some point or other.
Now, some of those amazing music dreams, no doubt you were hoping to participate with your kids and get them musically involved, but then 2 of your kids turned out to be profoundly deaf, including Chris.
Yep.
When did you find out? So how did you know? How did you find out that Chris was deaf?
Well, in very early months already, weeks maybe even, he didn't startle to sound like babies do. He didn't respond. When he was older, maybe half a year or so, he didn't respond to the noise of a large farm machinery coming onto the yard. We lived in the country. So we started doing some of our own hearing tests on him, and we would clash pot lids behind his back like cymbals. And he didn't hear that unless he would have, or we would bang on the floor. And then if he responded, it was probably because he felt the vibration of it. or the vibration of the farm machinery. So that was one of the things we noticed. I had always dreamt of rocking my babies to sleep in a rocking chair and singing lullabies to them. So I tried that, and because I loved it. But as I sang lullabies to Chris, who was extremely colicky, it never seemed to soothe him. It didn't seem to make a difference. So eventually, subconsciously, I actually stopped, and I didn't even realize that I had stopped until later. I looked back and went, why am I not singing to my child? And then it kind of made sense. One time, Cliff and I were on a road trip with Christopher. He was about 6 months old, and he was sitting in the back in his little car seat, and he was screaming at the top of his lungs. And we knew that he was well. Everything was good, but he kept screaming. And we were very determined. We were not going to stop at the side of the road, pull him out, and we were not going to give in. No. So we decided we were going to try to outsing him. So we sang, and we sang louder and louder and louder, hoping that this would help. But he kept right on screaming, and it didn't do any good. And so later, again, as we look back, we just kind of laughed at ourselves and went, wow, we had no idea. So when he was 14 months, he got a hearing test done in Winnipeg, and he was diagnosed at that point with a severe to profound hearing loss. And you can imagine that we were, of course, devastated about that. Yeah.
And Chris is the oldest?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so when you found out that I was severely to profoundly deaf, how did this, we talked about, you had a dream of having a family, a musical family. So how did the news of this seem to dash your hopes and dreams for your children and for your family? Can you maybe tell us a story or two about that?
Sure. Well, that music was not our only dream, but we had also talked about doing missions, and we were talking about doing maybe like working on a native reserve or overseas. And back then we didn't have Zoom, and we didn't have any of those things like we do now. So we knew that if we wanted to go to one of those places, it wouldn't work, because we would need to be close to a clinic that could help Christopher and with all the things that he needed with hearing aids and therapy and whatnot. So when the therapist or the clinician told us that Chris was severe to profoundly deaf, one of the first things that came to my mind was, oh, now we won't be able to do missions. And it was sad for me. And it was on December 16th, just a few days before Christmas, that Chris was diagnosed. And after the appointment, we went to the store to see if we could do some Christmas shopping, buy Chris some Christmas presents for Christmas. And all of the toys for his age were noise-making toys. And I was just deflated, because I knew that these noise-making toys would do him no good. And then that very evening, I went to a Christmas program that was put on by the school children in Blumenort. And all the kids were singing so beautifully. It was just so touching, but I could hardly keep myself together, because I just thought, oh my goodness, he's never going to be able to sing in a Christmas program. He's never going to be able to enjoy music. And it was a sad day for me. So another thing we feared would be that he would not be able to communicate with his grandparents. We didn't know if they would be able to make the effort to learn sign language, because that was what I thought we would have to do. And we also feared that he wouldn't be able to communicate with his friends that were his age, and that he would be isolated if he wouldn't be able to talk. And so those are some of the things that I experienced those few months after diagnosis.
I imagine you and Cliff must have had some pretty tough conversations during that time.
Oh yeah, we did.
Go for a drive and
yeah,
shed some tears and
try to process some of the interesting things people tried to comfort us with, but they all meant well.
Oh no! Yeah. So can you give us one or two examples?
Oh, I could.
We're so well-meaning as Christians, but
of course,
it's probably helpful for our listeners, though, even to hear, because sometimes we might be the ones now doing that to someone else.
Yeah. Well, I just remember one thing one person said, and they said, "Oh, but he's so cute."
Okay.
Yeah.
You couldn't be cute if you were deaf, I guess.
No. So, and you know what? I didn't hold it against that person at all, but it was just, it's one of those funny ones, right? So,
Yeah.
but it was okay. Most people were good. Yeah.
So what was, I'd love to hear some stories now. What was it like raising a hearing impaired child? But like, and obviously different stages in that, but I'm thinking of the two, I'm thinking of, we've got kids, my wife, LaDawn, and I, lots of people listening to this have kids, but, I think of the terrible twos or threes
Oh,
into, starting at school,
yeah.
kindergarten. I mean, I think of how scary it was for us to send off our kids to kindergarten the first day or to school or whatever. So maybe tell us a little bit what it was like raising a deaf child.
Sure. Well, so after he was diagnosed, then the clinician said, "Well, let's try some hearing aids." They had no hope. They didn't know if hearing aids would work for him, so we didn't know either. So they fitted Christopher first of all with his first set of hearing aids, which was actually a box about so big, looked like an old-fashioned transistor radio, and
Wow.
they put it in a pouch here, and they
Like around his neck.
well, it was strapped on like
Okay,
this.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's strapped on. And then there were wires that went from the little telex, it was called, from there to his ears. And they were big buds that stuck in his ears. So it was really obvious. And so he wore that for the first while. And we had interesting comments about that as well. Some people thought he was actually, that we were taking him to church and to weddings. And in order to keep him calm, we were hooking him up to this little transistor radio or Walkman, and there were stories playing and music playing, and this was our way of keeping him calm. And no, that was not the way it was. So that was really funny. But anyways,
by the way, can I interrupt for just a second?
Yeah.
So he would have been like when he was wearing this, it's sort of like a puck size. For those of you who are listening, it was maybe like the size of a puck, maybe something like that.
Bigger, like a
bigger.
It was a rectangular that looks like a circle, but whatever. A rectangular about the size of this, maybe a little smaller.
Okay,
Yeah, like the size of a wallet.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then he's like 2 years old or older
not
than that.
Even 1.5. Not even 1.5.
So he must have been tearing at this thing all the time to try to take it off, or no?
I don't recall that he actually pulled those things out, but it would make sense because my daughter did that. Heather did that with hearing aids, but it wasn't too bad.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry to interrupt. I was just thinking of kids. You see kids when they get glasses real little.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible for the parents to get them to keep their glasses on.
With Heather, the younger one, younger than Chris, she was using hearing aids the first while, and she could hear nothing with the hearing aids, so she would pull them out all the time. And so I actually put a bonnet on her, and she wore a bonnet wherever she went, whether it was like just in the house, she wore a bonnet, and everywhere we went, she wore.
Can you tell the story about what happened there at McDonald's with Heather?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, you remember the ball pool at McDonald's, right? Back in the day?
Oh, yes.
Well, Michelle, our middle child, she was already in the balls, and Heather was on her way up the stairs into the ball pool, and she took her hearing aids out and put them in one hand, and by the stairs, she reached in through the net of that ball pool, and she dropped them into the balls.
Oh boy.
I don't know why she did it, but she just did. And she dropped them into the balls. Thankfully, Michelle was right there in the balls. And I said, grab them. But you know how it is when there's balls, or they just go down, down, down. Well, and she said, they're going down. And so I said, just keep reaching. And finally she got the ball, the hearing aids, and all was well.
Wow.
So yeah, she did that. And then she even put them inside the Coke machine change part of the Coke machine. She put them in there because it was just a small little place. She thought it would be cute. I don't know. But so clearly she couldn't hear with her hearing aids at all. And so she always took them out. Yeah. Yeah. But anyways, where were we? So after about 3 months of being very diligent in putting Christopher's telex on and not seeing any response from him, finally, after about 3 months, we started seeing little bits where he would start responding to sound around him. And prior to that, yeah, Cliff and I had many discussions about like, what should we do? Should we teach him to talk? Should we teach him to sign? What should we do? And Cliff kept saying, just let's wait, let's see what happens. And I'm not that patient. And so I said, but we gotta know. So finally, then when he started responding to some sound, even though it was very limited, we decided to take the step of teaching him to talk instead of doing sign language. So in that first year or even more, it was extremely challenging because even though he had the hearing aids, he couldn't hear that well with them. So we did a lot of gesturing, a lot of gesturing and trying to get the message across. And then, like you said about school, when he went to school, he made friends, but it was always challenging. And sometimes children were mean. Sometimes they did cruel things like yanking hearing aids out and throwing them on the floor. That happened to Chris one time.
What did that feel like as a mom when you hear about that later?
I remember when Chris came home and told me, and he was not even that angry, but I was very angry. And he was more hurt one time when a kid made fun of a word he used. Mm-hmm. I was shocked that he was not more hurt about the hearing aid. But anyways,
and the story my mom is referring to there is, I think I was in grade 7 or grade 8. And it was a very simple mistake, but I was in the bathroom with a group of my peers, and I wanted to tell them something about the mirror in the bathroom. And for some reason, I called it a window instead of a mirror. And all the kids just roared out laughing. And so it just, that's the story my mom's referring to. It was humiliating for me.
And then he came home from school and he ran into the house. He slammed the door. He ran to his bedroom and slammed the door. And so he responded so dramatically to that compared to when he got the hearing aids yanked out of his ears. So it was, he was hurt. He was very hurt by that feeling, by that. But then back to school, every year I had to meet with the teachers and the teachers' aides numerous times in a year to talk to them about what was best for Christopher. So that was, and sometimes at those meetings, I would go home crying because they were telling me the things that he couldn't do. But the reason that they did that is because they had to submit that to the government to get funding for him. So they had to make him look as needy as possible. So those were called, so you make him look as needy as possible so that he gets the funding for a teacher's aid, right? So, but they weren't fun for me. And then, of course, there was the difficulty in getting good therapy. Now, this is now back to when he was little, okay? So difficulty in getting good therapy for Chris when the therapy we wanted for him wasn't available in Winnipeg. So that was another big challenge.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the different therapies that would have been available to us as a family in regard to like the different methodologies or philosophies.
Sure. At the start, when Christopher was diagnosed, we were exposed to what's called the oral approach. And at a clinic in Winnipeg, they had a few different ones that they used, and one of them was the oral approach. And that was where they teach a deaf child to talk. He's wearing hearing aids and they teach him to talk, but it was a little bit more of a relaxed philosophy that they had. And they didn't necessarily really hone in on teaching him to listen with the hearing aids. It was more teaching them to talk through lip reading and whatever. And their philosophy was like, take the child's lead and then follow along. Well, you know what it's like when you take a child's lead, right? And so especially for a child who can't hear well, it doesn't really go very well. So that was the one approach, the oral approach. Another approach is called total communication. And total communication is where a child is learning to talk, to sign, to gesture, to everything. It's a total communication where whatever the child needs, that is what you provide for them, and along with the hearing aids. So it's just a mismatch of everything that you can help them with. And then the third one is an exclusively sign language approach. And most people with that may likely not use any assistive devices. Some of them would, but many of them don't. And then the fourth approach is what's called auditory verbal therapy, which was not available in Winnipeg at the time. And that approach is where you maximize the child's residual hearing. And the residual hearing is like with Christopher, he was severe to profoundly deaf. So that obviously he's not profound. So that little bit of hearing he does have, you maximize that by giving them hearing aids or a cochlear implant. And once you've aided them appropriately, then you maximize, you teach them to talk through hearing and not through all kinds of other ways. Not that you can't gesture, not that you can't lip read, but in a therapy session, they really, really focus on the hearing you have from that assistive device, and you learn to listen. You learn to speak through listening. So that's auditory verbal therapy, and that's the one that was not available in Winnipeg at the time.
That, by the way, that AVT, that would essentially be how people with hearing, that's how we would all learn
exactly
to speak and hear. Yeah. So you're
But
just, you're hearing the words and you're saying the words.
you learn very naturally, but with hearing impaired children, we had to literally do like this so that they would really, really listen, and they're totally capable of doing that. It's hard work.
So like covering your mouth, you would literally have to cover your mouth
in
so
therapy.
You couldn't see.
Yeah, in therapy.
Right.
But I didn't do that. I didn't do that at home, except if we were having an actual sit-down lesson. And that is one of the things that is difficult for some people to see, to understand. But yeah.
Okay, so since auditory verbal therapy was not available in Winnipeg at that time, what did you do?
So there was 4 other families that were in the same boat as us that wanted auditory verbal therapy. They had heard about auditory therapy from Ottawa. There was a clinic in Ottawa that they would actually bring their children to a few times a year to get that therapy because we didn't have it here. So along with them, we began our own clinic in Winnipeg, but we were at the very, very grassroots of it. And so we helped them along to a certain degree, but then we just decided we want help for Christopher now. So we kind of jumped ship, but we're still considered as one of the founding families, even though we weren't really super involved. But anyways, we decided, nope, we want to get therapy now. So then we moved to Ontario. We moved to Southern Ontario. We moved to the town of Mount Salem, Ontario, which is not too far from Aylmer or London. Yeah. And we took on a youth pastor job there. And then from there, every week we drove to Toronto to the North York General Hospital, and we got therapy for Chris. And that was a 2-hour drive every week for 2 years. Well, except in the summer and Christmas, but yeah. And with a world-renowned therapist named Warren Esterbrooks. And he was, wow. And then we stayed there for 2 years. And once the clinic was established in Winnipeg, we moved back, and then we continued on therapy in Winnipeg.
Was it now, so this, and again, for people listening, so this auditory verbal theory, is that what a theory technique? Therapy. Oh yeah, therapy. Got it. Essentially, it's just you want, like, the child is going to get a hearing aid. They're going to be able to hear. You're going to teach them like a person who can hear.
Yeah.
Now, was that controversial? Like, I mean, Chris prompted me with this question. I wouldn't even know enough to have asked this question, obviously.
Yeah.
Was that, so, I mean, it implies it probably was controversial, but is it, and why is that controversial?
Okay. Well, because we had chosen to teach Chris to talk instead of use sign language, yes, there were some people that were opposed to our decision. But we felt that if there was something that could be done for him to communicate better within his disability, we wanted to do that. So why was it so controversial?
Like, does it have to do with the fact that some people actually view hearing loss as not a disability? Did it have something? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
So some people believe that a deaf person's mother tongue is sign language. and that deafness is not
Oh, I
really a
see.
disability. Yeah. So there's
Right,
a
right.
real pride there. Um, and we felt that our children's mother tongue was English because that's what we spoke in our home. That was our mother tongue. So yeah, that there is controversy about that. I think there's more openness now in the deaf community towards um, the oral approach, but yeah, there is a controversy there. But we feel that every parent should do their research about those varied forms of communication that are available to deaf children. Everybody should do their research, and every parent should make an informed decision about what they feel is best for their child, whether that is and their family, whether that is sign language or speaking. So everybody should just make their own decision and do their best, throw themselves into that wholeheartedly.
That's yeah, it's amazing because there's different, and I can totally see why. I don't really want to go down this rabbit trail. There's so much amazing stuff here, but yeah, I can see why for some people you don't want to be viewed as by viewing yourself as having a disability, you might limit yourself for some people the way they see, right? I could see why some people
Yeah.
might see it that way. But anyways, but the crazy thing here is then you guys had Michelle. Is she second or is she the youngest?
She's second. Yeah.
So then you had a second child
So she was our
and
middle child. Yeah.
middle child, and she was also profoundly deaf.
No,
No.
no. Michelle had perfectly good hearing.
Oh, she's the one that has, okay, perfectly
Yes.
good.
Yes.
Then, okay, so that must, well, okay, so I got that confused there. What was that like having, now you've got two kids in the family, one is profoundly deaf and one is not. That must have led to some
Well,
issues.
it was amazing. In fact, it was super obvious that very early on that Michelle could hear. In fact, she said her very first word at the age of 10 months. So this was in stark contrast to Christopher, who was very delayed in his language. Michelle, we always said Michelle not only had ears, but she had antennas because she was so sharp, and she got everything. Like she heard everything. And Michelle looked up to her brother. She really looked up to her brother, and even said that when she grew up, she wanted to be a boy and wear hearing aids like Chris.
Oh, oh
That was when she was really little. Okay. Yeah.
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 But then, okay, but then you had a third child, Heather.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Heather is also profoundly deaf.
She is profoundly deaf. Christopher was severe to profound. She was profound.
So even more
Yeah.
deaf. So two
Yeah.
out of three, but neither you nor Cliff obviously is deaf.
No.
Anyone in your families? Like this was just unexpected.
It's not,
I'm
yeah.
sure.
There was nobody in our families that were deaf. Only when we looked, like, because we're Mennonites and Cliff and I are somewhat related, we share some relatives, and there are lots of we looked up and we found out there were actually lots of deaf people in our like third cousins, second and a half, like.
Yeah.
But when we went to the to get genealogy counseling or whatever,
Yeah.
genetic counseling, yeah, they said that didn't even matter. That's beside the point. So
Yeah,
they
but,
just
but
told us that if we had, go ahead.
yeah, no, basically the scientific explanation for the deafness, at least from the genetic test that we had done, both mom and dad, so Pauline and Cliff, were both carriers of a specific chromosome. Is that correct? I'm
You know
pretty
what?
sure.
I just remember that it was hard for me to understand because I never took biology and I never got that. But what they did say, yeah, they explained it all, but it was hard to understand. So for me, the thing I took away from that was that if we would have any more children, there would be a 25% chance that any one of those could be deaf.
Because you're both carriers of a specific
I
chromosome.
guess so.
Yeah.
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 Whereas now if we go down the next generation, so Diane and I, so the idea is, so because both mom and dad are carriers of a chromosome, I have the chromosome as well. And So if Diane would have also the same chromosome, our kids would be 25% chance.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
because she is not a carrier, if
We
she
don't
is
know
not,
that.
we never got it tested. But
No,
if she is not, then it's pretty much a zero chance of our kids being,
that could be. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Wow.
yeah,
Unless it's just a fluke.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
So now, what was that like? I have so many questions about how you will have felt when you had a second child who was so deaf. But before we go there, maybe just let's talk about Michelle for just a little bit again. Your
Okay.
middle child. So she has perfectly good normal hearing. Now she has two siblings who are profoundly deaf. How did this? I mean, that's got to have impacted her in some ways,
Hmm.
practically speaking, and otherwise.
Yeah. Well, Michelle did feel the weight of responsibility, being the only child in the family with normal hearing. Um, she slept upstairs with Heather. Um, and that was, upstairs a ways away from where we were in the house. And even though Heather had an implant, she didn't wear it at night. So she was completely deaf at night. And so Michelle she knew that if there would be a fire, she would be responsible to wake Heather up and get her downstairs and to safety because Heather wouldn't hear it herself, the alarm, the smoke detector. So, Michelle got frustrated sometimes because we told her that she should stop talking so fast. She talked very fast. And we told her that when she prayed at the table for table grace, she wasn't supposed to pray like this,
With
that
her
she
hands in front of her mouth.
yes, she was supposed to speak clearly, and we told Chris and Heather that they could keep their eyes open and read the lips of other people when they prayed, which is different than most parents do nowadays, or not nowadays, but then too. But anyways, yeah, she did get frustrated sometimes. But when I asked her at one point if she felt left out, because I was sometimes concerned that she would harbor some resentment over the extra time that we spent, the effort that we spent on Heather and Chris. But I was so blessed when I asked her this, that Michelle responded in this way. She said no, she did not have resentment. In fact, she felt very special that she was able to grow up in a home that was so unique and it was so different from all of her friends. She actually felt really special. So
Chris,
yeah.
Chris, did you and Heather ever were you ever jealous or envious of Michelle being able to hear,
Oh,
or did that never figure into things?
you know what, Chris? That's a great question. You know what? Heather and I have never talked about that specifically, but I'll just answer it on my own from my own self. I have often looked at people who are hearing, especially my siblings, my one sibling, and yes, I have felt jealous. I wish that I could hear perfectly, and it didn't seem fair that I was the one with the hearing disability. So, um, but that related to another part of our story. We've had people, asking, "Can we pray for you? Can we pray for healing?" And I there was always something I wish I could get healed from, but at the same time, it took a while. But I got to a point where it's like, you know what, this is who I am, and it's okay. And
Mm.
um, and it's just giving me a deeper appreciation for just living through suffering. And I mean, the suffering of what we're going through is so mild in comparison. So I don't want to make it sound like it's horrible, it's awful, but it is still something that we have to live with. And I've just come to terms with it. And if someone offers to pray for healing, I am very, very open to that. But at the same time, I just go with an open hand and say, it's okay.
I know one of the things that Chris has said, because he did want to go for healing at one point. I recall that, but later on, he has said to us that he didn't really need to be healed anymore because if he would be healed, he wouldn't depend on God as much as he does now.
Oh,
That was pretty special to me.
how
Mhm.
do you know roughly how old he was when he said that?
I think he was a teenager. What do you think, Chris?
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was a teenager at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that he went
Wow.
to some kind of healing thing, didn't you, Chris?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
a
there was
service,
a
some kind of healing service.
yeah, there was a big revival meeting happening in Winnipeg at that time, and I remember going there kind of with the hopes that maybe the guy speaking would, as I'm walking by him, he would lay his hands on me and my disability would be gone. I mean, that didn't happen. So
So now, I mean, speaking of healing, I mean, in a sense, you got a form of healing because
Yeah.
now you wear these cochlear implants, which anybody listen to this, if they're anything like me and didn't, doesn't know you, Chris, hasn't physically seen you or talked to you, will have no idea what that is. So
mhm.
it's not like your traditional hearing aid, but it makes a huge difference. I'm assuming, is that what Heather? I mean, yeah, that's what Heather has as well.
Yes, yes. So Heather got her cochlear implant when she was 3. Is that right?
Yeah.
3, and then I got mine a few years later when I was 12. Heather and I are 6 years apart. But in answer to the question of what is the cochlear implant or how does it work, there, you know what? I think the best way to explain it is to first explain how do we actually hear. And I think I've explained this once to Chris before, but I think our hearers would appreciate this. So, and this is a very very basic explanation. So, when sound enters our ear, it first hits it goes through the outer ear canal, and it hits the eardrum, and then behind the eardrum, you have the hammer and the anvil, those tiny little bones. And those bones, they vibrate. And then somehow from there, the sound goes into what's called the cochlea. And the cochlea is in the shape of a snail. And
It's like a
inside,
tube.
yes, yeah,
Like a horn of plenty kind of thing.
yeah. And so inside the cochlea, and you can imagine it being kind of shaped in a snail, inside there are different canals. And in those canals are what we call little microscopic hairs. And so the sound, as it's coming into this canal, it is vibrating the microscopic hairs, which is then connected to your hearing nerve. And that all get transmitted to the brain. And that is how a normal person hears. That's how you, Chris, and that's how Pauline hears. Now,
Which
in the
is, by the
case,
way, that's just incredible.
I
I'm just
know,
blown away that we hear
I know.
sound waves hit microscopic hairs, and
Yeah,
then we hear talking. That's amazing. It's
yeah,
incredible.
It
yeah.
happens like that.
It
Yeah.
happened, yeah, yeah. And so, in the case of most people who are born with a disability, as like mine, and there are different reasons, but in most cases, those microscopic hairs are either damaged or they're not there. So sound enters into the canal, but then it's not able to get transmitted to the hearing nerve. Um, and so, what the cochlear implant does is it puts a wire inside that canal. So basically, on that wire, you will have, and mom, if you can jump in here, in on this wire, how many different electrodes are on this wire?
Well, for your case, it would be about 24.
24 electrodes, and
Yeah.
each of these electrodes represent a frequency. So you go from 24 electrodes from high to low frequencies. And so basically, what the cochlear implant is doing is bypassing the eardrum. It's bypassing the hammer and the anvil, and it's going directly to the hearing nerve, but it's activating the hearing nerve electronically rather than naturally.
How does the wire touch the nerve though? Like,
It
so you have
does.
this wire in there with the electrodes. How does it get those electrical pulses to the brain or whatever?
I that's the part I'm
That's
not that's the part I'm not quite. I don't quite understand it, but it's the wire inside the cochlea, and then that wire is
It's
connected.
stimulating those. It's stimulating those hearing those tiny microscopic hairs and sending the message from the hairs to the nerve. It's doing the job of the hairs.
Yeah,
That's
oh,
all.
yeah,
interesting.
Something
exactly.
like that. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
the
and so
healing came through some genius human beings God created
Absolutely. Absolutely.
to come up with this. Wow.
Yeah.
yeah, and so basically that wire is then connected to a magnet, and then the magnet is under the skin, and then on the outside you have another magnet which is connected to the microphone, which picks up the sound. And so I've had some people ask me, so what does this sound like? what does it sound like to hear with the cochlear implant?
How do you
And
explain that?
I don't even know how to explain. I mean, some you could say, how does the blind person explain the color of blue? I don't know, but theoretically, it would sound the same as what you guys are hearing, except I'm having my hearing nerve activated electronically rather than naturally.
And maybe because there's 24 spots, we may have a lot more hairs than
It,
that. So there might
exactly,
be, we might
exactly,
have a more full range or
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
exactly.
Okay, now this is really interesting, Chris. If we can just stay on here for just a second, because I'm fascinated by this. I know lots of other people will be too. So you had a kind of a hearing aid that you were going to school with for years.
Yes.
Obviously, I was not to the level of this cochlear implant.
No.
So 12 years old, you get this cochlear implant. And what did they turn it on? Like, what's the first thing? Did they hit a switch and then what? Like, did you hear your first? Was it like a whole new world? What did you think? What was your experience?
Oh
First, they
man.
have to. Well, Chris, go ahead and
No, you go ahead, Mom.
first they have to do a map. So then they attach Chris kind of to a computer, and then they introduce for every single electrode they set a level of sound of how, like, high and low. And once they've done that, they've made the map, that's when they switch it on. And so it's a rough map at the beginning, and they tweak it every, when we were in Ottawa for Chris, they tweaked it every day a few times, or every day. Anyways, and so when they turned it on at first, Christopher was not impressed at all. In fact, before we flew to Ottawa, the audiologist called me to remind Christopher that he will not like it at the beginning, because just remind him that. So I reminded him. And so when they switched it on, he was not happy. And he said that the voices, our talking, sounded like birds, like a flock of birds. And it was unintelligible for him, because it was
Oh,
just
like your brain couldn't.
Yep.
his brain. Exactly. And so he was brave.
Interesting.
He was brave, and he didn't cry. But when we got back to the Ronald McDonald House where we stayed, then he cried. And he said, "Is this how I'm going to hear for the rest of my life?" He was quite upset. No, you're not. It's going to get better. But in those first couple of days in Ottawa, some of the things that he heard were just incredible. We were sitting eating our meal, and around the corner from us and behind a wall was a kitchen. And he said, "What's that sound?" I said, "Well, what are you hearing?" He said, "Well, oh, there it is. Oh, now it stopped. Oh, there it is." And we honestly didn't know what he was talking about, because we couldn't hear it, because I think we were just used to it. Now he was hearing something he never heard. And he was hearing the running of water in the kitchen. Somebody was
Huh.
washing dishes or something. And he heard that. We were just blown away. Another thing he heard that in those couple of days was the signal light, the clicking of the signal light of the car.
Yeah,
And
of course.
he was sitting in the back seat, and he heard it from the back seat. And I was
Which you must have been thrilled. Sitting in the
of
front seat
course.
there, you must have been thrilled.
We couldn't believe we couldn't believe it. And then when we were at the Ronald McDonald House, I was wearing slippers, and I was walking towards Christopher with my slippers and making a bit of a shuffling sound, not even on purpose. And all of a sudden Christopher said, "Why are you walking so loud? That's too loud." And it's like, whoa, whoa. And then, and he could hear me
The
calling.
downside of hearing.
Yeah. And he could hear me from one room to the next in the house. And he started to enjoy soft music instead of like headbanger music. And he was,
like before that, you had enjoyed hard, heavy
heavier,
stuff?
loud stuff. And he jacked it up as loud as he could. And with now he could listen to a soft song, and he heard the words and understood them, and he could follow along the lyric sheet. And I just cried. I mean, it was just incredible. So those are some things in those early days.
Yeah, you know what? So when I was switched on, everyone sounded like a flock of birds, and honestly, that was a terrifying sound, because now I was hearing stuff that I've never heard before, but my brain couldn't process it. And so if you think of it, so I have 24 electrodes in my cochlea. And a lot of those electrodes or frequencies are frequencies I've never heard of before. But now I was hearing them for the first time, so my brain was maximizing on those frequencies. But over time, I'm going to say about a couple of weeks, my brain started to process those things, and it didn't sound like a flock of birds anymore. It started to sound normal. So
Yeah.
Oh, the brain is an amazing thing.
it
Just
is,
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And now he could hear distance, he could hear, we could call him from one end of the yard to the other. And you've seen our yard, how big it is. And
Oh yeah, it's huge.
and he could hear us calling from one end of the yard to the next, which is another real benefit of cochlear implants, that distance hearing.
Were you thankful for that, Chris, or no?
Oh, I was so thankful. So thankful.
Mom and Dad can call you though, or did you ever just pretend to be deaf still after? I didn't hear anything.
You know what he did when he got his implant at first. He didn't like certain kinds of music, and one time there was a lady singing in church, and she was singing very operatic style. And all of a sudden, I looked over at Christopher, and I saw that his implant, his piece was hanging down, and he had turned it off. He was not. This is very handy for him.
I have to talk to Chris, your wife, Diane.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Is she ever talking to you in the evening? And wait a minute, your implant.
No,
Wow.
no.
That would not go over well.
No, they wouldn't go over very well. No.
Pauline, I could probably talk to you for hours, mining you for stories. I just have one last question that we have time for now, and then I think we'd love, Chris has a kind of a concluding one, but you talked about wanting your dream to be a musical family, how you and Cliff are very musical. Yeah. After the cochlear implants, was your dream realized in any way?
Yeah, it sure was. Christopher became very musical himself, and he started to play the drums. In fact, Chris, did you start playing drums before you got the implant, or after?
No,
only after?
After. Okay,
so
but I will say this: even before I got the cochlear implant, I just had this dream to drum someday, but I just didn't have the capacity to.
Yeah. So anyways, he started to learn to play drums, and he had a great sense of beat. And so he played on my worship team from the time he was in grade 7 at school. And he continues to play the drums for church. And so he continues to serve the church in this way. And then Christopher's sisters both learned to play the piano and sing, and Heather played the bass guitar. So I actually had the joy of having all three of them on my worship team at one time or the other. Wow. We also had the privilege of singing and playing together as a whole family at different churches from time to time. And then, as far as our sadness over not doing missions, which I mentioned earlier, this also was taken care of by God, and He has opened up countless opportunities to meet and encourage other families who we could comfort and point to Jesus as well. And many of these relationships we continue to have to this day. And just recently, another person contacted me to learn more about the cochlear implant. So missions and music and serving God, we've been able to do that with our kids. We're very thankful.
Amazing.
I love that. So, Mom, just one last question for you to kind of just bring this to a close. So what would you say to a parent with a disabled child? And it doesn't have to be a hearing disability. It can be any disability. What would you say to that parent about what advocating for their child looks like? And how would you give that parent hope?
Well, I would say you as a parent are your child's best and likely only advocate. They cannot advocate for themselves when they are young. Sometimes you will have to be very, very determined to ensure that things continue to move along when obstacles come in your way. And that happened to us, but we had to be very determined. You will never be sorry for the effort that you make to help your child. Sometimes you will need to be gently firm with educators who believe they know what's best for your child when you really know what is better. But don't be a bulldozer and lose the respect of those whom you also need help from. Be kind and respectful, even if you don't see eye to eye. And when it comes to disabilities, there are so many opinions out there. And find other families who have been through what is ahead for you. Get advice and guidance from them. And there are many things I could say, but I'll just say this last one. Don't be too hard on yourself. Learn to laugh at yourself. And teach your child to laugh at him or herself too, because people will sometimes laugh. Learn to laugh at yourself. Don't take offense. Don't be hurt. You will be, but keep it at a minimum, I guess. Don't take life too seriously. Have fun on this journey, even though it is hard work teaching your child. In the end, all that hard work is worth it.
That is some absolutely amazing, wise advice. Thank you, Pauline, for joining us.
You're welcome.
It's been good for me to get to know a little bit about my friend Chris here.
Yeah.
And for everybody listening, we hope this has blessed you as well. Thanks, everybody.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Mom.
You're welcome.
All right, that is it for another awesome conversation. Make sure you come back in 2 weeks for our next episode. And again, if this is a podcast that you have enjoyed and you are excited about, please help us out by liking, subscribing, and sharing this podcast as more episodes are released. If you have any questions about anything that has been said, honestly, any question at all, please let us know at outsidethewalls@crossviewchurch.ca. Thank you, and we'll see you again.